After 20 years of a loveless marriage, I unexpectedly got a second chance when I was reborn. I found myself in the middle of divorcing Dean. The reason? He had secretly brought his ex-girlfriend, Clara Monroe, into the company and promoted her to the position of financial director without following any standard procedures. That caused the most intense argument we'd ever had, and after he stormed out, I ran straight to the hospital and terminated the pregnancy. When I opened my eyes again, I saw the familiar wall calendar and realized I'd returned to 1988, with my head still heavy and aching. I staggered out of the bedroom. The living room was filled with the overwhelming smell of cigarettes. Dean was slouched lazily on the sofa, his long legs resting on the coffee table, puffing on one cigarette after another. The smoke curled between his fingers. Maybe it was the sensitivity of pregnancy or simply being fed up with the same smell for years, but I suddenly felt nauseous. Hearing me retching, Dean turned his head to glance at me, then slowly got up and walked over. His sharp features were as defined as ever, yet he never put out the cigarette in his hand. I threw up until nothing but bile remained, rinsed my mouth and looked up into the mirror. The reflection staring back at me was young, so young that for a moment I was dazed. It was the hottest time of the year in the southern city. The balcony was stifling without a breeze. Dean leaned lazily against the railing, looking completely unbothered, exuding an air of indifference. Taking a deep breath, I spoke calmly. Dean, let's get a divorce. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, let's finalize it at the Civil Affairs Bureau. There's no point in torturing each other anymore. Without giving him a chance to speak, I lowered my eyes and continued. I know there's nothing going on between you and Clara Monroe, but I really don't want to keep arguing about her. I refuse to waste the next several decades of my life on you, because you're just not worth it. Seeing that Dean remained silent, I looked up at him and added, deliberately slow, I'll go to the hospital this afternoon to deal with the baby. Let's part ways peacefully. Once we're divorced, you can be with whoever you want, Clara Monroe or any of the girls at your company. I don't care. Hearing this, Dean finally reacted. His gaze darkened as he studied my face, seemingly trying to find some clue about my intention. A moment later, he flicked the ash off his cigarette and sneered with disdain. Audrey, really? Playing hard to get? That doesn't suit you. I couldn't be bothered to argue with him and simply muttered, oh, before grabbing my worn-out handbag ready to leave. Seeing I was serious, Dean suddenly grabbed my arm, his face twisted in irritation. Stop this nonsense, Audrey. You know very well Clara and I are innocent. Do you have any idea how ridiculous you look right now? My company is at a critical stage. I don't have time for your little games. He paused as if something had just occurred to him, and then stared at me suspiciously. Besides, you don't have a job or any savings, and now you're talking about getting rid of my child? Where do you get the nerve? I yanked my arm free and slapped him across the face. With a cold smile, I said, Dean, do you know what I hate most about you? Your arrogance. Your delusions. In my past life, Dean had repeated countless times that he and Clara Monroe were innocent, but I had always treated his words like a joke. I knew the truth. They had used their so-called friendship as a cover for their constant ambiguity. The whispers in the company, the accidental sharing of a wine glass, the casual physical touches, they reveled in the thrill of it. Dean was no exception to the inherent flaws of men. Steadying my emotions, I took a deep breath and said resolutely, I'm divorcing you no matter what. I'm not keeping the child either. I knew I was being cruel to the baby growing inside me, but I couldn't let Dean destroy me a second time. In my previous life, it took me nearly 10 years to realize that Dean never truly loved me. He pursued and married me out of spite because Clara Monroe had chosen the son of his superior instead of him. Bruised in his ego to get back at her and his so-called friends who mocked him, he set his sights on me. Back then I was 18. I was beautiful and confident, pursued by many, a recognized belle at the textile factory. I was also the first girl in the factory to wear a dress, high-heeled leather shoes, and a perm with cascading waves to work. Back then, I imagined countless versions of my future, only to have all of them destroyed by Dean after we got married. Because I wasn't the woman he truly wanted, and because there was never any love, he never cared about my feelings. At the time, I didn't understand. All I knew was to vent my anxiety by smashing things and acting hysterical. It wasn't until I saw him with Clara Monroe that everything became clear. The moment Clara got divorced, he used the excuse of friendship to bring her into the company. He even secretly rented out the apartment we'd been given as a benefit by the textile factory to her. Calling it rent was laughable. He never let me see a single cent of it. He treated her with such care, as if he were afraid to offend her. Even when his nicotine cravings hit, he held back and refused to smoke around her. As his construction company grew and his wealth skyrocketed, he started taking her to high-end events, introducing her to his business partners and friends. None of them knew I existed. To them, Clara Monroe was Dean's most capable assistant, his confidant. Even on the night I fell down the stairs and woke up in this second life, Dean had been with her, helping her expand her network, preparing to invest in a business just for her. In Dean's heart, I was nothing but a placeholder, the mother of his child, the woman cooking his meals at home. Clara was the one standing by his side, the one he truly wanted, his first love. When he faced me, he always said things like, "You don't understand," with an expression full of impatience and disdain. He would slam the door and leave every single time. "Is this really necessary?" he would sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose with obvious irritation. "Audrey, you should feel lucky. I provide you with good food and a comfortable life. You don't have to work or degrade yourself by drinking with clients. What more do you want?" When I was pregnant and bled from overexertion, I quit my job at the textile factory under Dean's persuasion and became a housewife. After the baby was born, I was overwhelmed, barely getting any sleep, losing handfuls of hair, and struggling to keep up with everything. But to Dean it was all natural. In his eyes, I was just a lazy freeloader who stayed at home all day. To everyone else, he painted himself as the perfect husband. "Audrey stays home and I take care of everything outside. I live like a king." He belittled me, made me dependent on him, while at the same time praising Clara Monroe for her career abilities and independence. Snapping back to the present, I masked my emotions and nodded sarcastically. "Yes, you're right, I'm not satisfied. That's why we should finalize the divorce as soon as possible. That way, you can go find the little woman who wholeheartedly depends on you." Dean, thinking I was jealous, smirked and let out a mocking laugh. Loosening his collar, he said dismissively, "If you're so determined to divorce me, suit yourself. Just don't come crawling back with regrets." He turned, using the company as an excuse to leave. "Wait," I said coolly. "Before you go, sign the agreement." Dean paused, taking the divorce papers from me. When he read through them, his face froze in disbelief, his dark gaze turning colder by the second. Gritting his teeth, he spat, "Audrey, you're unbelievable." I smiled faintly. "Right back at you." Seeing that Dean hesitated to sign, I taunted him with a smirk. "What's the matter? You can't bear to let me go." "Don't flatter yourself," Dean shot back, his pride clearly wounded. Dean was always the domineering type. He hated losing face, especially with me. What he truly hesitated over wasn't me, but the baby I was carrying. Fueled by anger, he finally scrawled his name on the papers. I carefully tucked the signed agreement into my bag and said flatly, "Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, Civil Affairs Bureau." Before I could finish, the door slammed shut behind him with a deafening thud. That sound marked Dean's last departure as my husband, a clear sign that I had thoroughly enraged him. After Clara Monroe's divorce, she had forcefully inserted herself into our lives. Dean and I had fought over it countless times, but because of the elders' persuasion and, more importantly, the baby growing inside me, the divorce had never happened. Dean knew I wouldn't dare terminate the pregnancy, so he always thought I had no way out. But this time was different. This time I wasn't going to let him destroy me again. I used to think I loved him so much that he could act without restraint, taking everything for granted. In my previous life, as long as I didn't divorce him, I would still be Mrs. Carter. Without love, at least I would have money and a comfortable life, and our daughter would also remain the sole heir to his wealth. But now that I've been given a second chance, I've removed that weakness myself. I just hope that child finds a happy family in another life, with loving parents who won't subject him to a lifetime of pain. At this moment, the country's economy was booming. Opportunities were everywhere. It was time for me to cut my losses and become the brave, fearless Audrey I used to be. Perhaps to avoid seeing me, Dean didn't come home all night. The next morning, as I sat at the Civil Affairs Bureau, I called him. He had just woken up, and I could faintly hear a woman's playful laughter in the background. It was Clara Monroe's voice. "Audrey, can you stop making a scene?" Dean said impatiently. "I pulled an all-nighter signing a big contract. I'm exhausted." Hearing that, I took a deep breath, my voice laced with sarcasm. "Exhausted? I'd say you're exhausted from the bed you were in, right?" The staff at the Civil Affairs Bureau exchanged glances, clearly intrigued by the drama they were overhearing. Dean too lost his patience on the other end. He let out a cold laugh, his voice dripping with venom. "Audrey, aren't you just using the child in your belly to control me? You think I'll put up with all this because of the baby, don't you? I've given you enough respect because of it, so don't push your luck. You're becoming unbearable." Dean was always so arrogant, convinced that everything was supposed to go his way. He never reflected on himself, never questioned his actions. "Tired of this pointless back and forth," I said flatly. "Well, that's unfortunate. The child you're talking about is already gone. Yesterday, before 3 p.m. The line went silent for a moment. Then I heard Clara Monroe scream in shock. Dean must have pushed her aside because the next thing I knew, he was on his way to the Civil Affairs Bureau. He stormed in a full 30 minutes later, his entire body reeking of cigarettes and alcohol, his bloodshot eyes blazing with anger. "Audrey, what did you do?" he roared, his face twisted in rage. I stepped back, putting distance between us, and waved him off casually. "What's there to be afraid of? You've already got your mistress on the side, one who once abandoned you, no less. Compared to you, I'd say I'm a saint. I told you there's nothing going on." Dean snapped. "I promoted Clara because she's capable and qualified. Why do you always have to think the worst?" Dean tried to calm himself, pinching the bridge of his nose with frustration, as if I was being unreasonable. Just then, a couple of bystanders opened their mouths to urge us to reconcile, but I cut them off coldly. "The factory apartment, the lipstick stains on your shirt, the matching outfits that are just coincidentally a couple's set. Tell me, Dean, what did I accuse you of wrongly?" Dean froze, unable to respond. But it didn't take long for him to recover his composure. His voice was laced with disdain as he sneered. "So you killed my child over a misunderstanding? Audrey, how could you be so cruel?" I didn't answer. Dean could say whatever he wanted. I was beyond caring. As for Clara Monroe, she wasn't even worth mentioning. I have nothing to say. There's nothing going on between me and her. You're just too sensitive, blowing things out of proportion, Dean said, his tone so self-righteous it made my skin crawl. To him, my pain and breakdowns were simply me making trouble for no reason. But no one knew better than I did. Even if Dean hadn't outright cheated yet, his tolerance for Clara Monroe's constant advances was undeniable. He welcomed her attention, every look, every smile. After all, she was his first love, the one he couldn't have in his youth. Her fawning and groveling fed his ego, made him feel powerful, as if he had finally won. I let out a cold laugh. Well then, I guess I wronged you. But you've already signed the divorce papers. What makes you think I owe you anything? Why should I keep bearing your children? It's broad daylight, Dean. What kind of daydream are you having? I pulled out the divorce agreement, making sure it was visible, and Dean instantly froze. The reality of the situation seemed to hit him all at once as he stared at the papers, his face blank. You really did this? His question was rhetorical, his tone certain. Yes, I did. I shot back, my voice calm but firm. Why should I sacrifice my life just because of a child? Why should I work myself to the bone for someone who doesn't even respect me, someone who treats me like I'm useless? Did you forget, Dean? I used to work as a designer in the textile factory. I made over $100 a month with commissions. Half of your startup money came from me. I gave up everything for you and look where it got me. What are you going to give me in return? So now you're blaming me? He muttered, furrowing his brows, completely clueless as to why I was saying this. Looking at Dean, who refused to see any fault in himself, I felt a sudden wave of exhaustion. I turned my eyes away, handed the divorce papers to the staff and said softly, Shouldn't I blame you? You couldn't forget Clara Monroe, yet you still married me. Even when I was pregnant, when I couldn't eat, when I was instantly sinking into inexplicable sadness, you still tangled yourself up with her. You brought her into your company, put her right in front of me just to spite me. Don't you think you've gone too far, Dean? Don't you think you're being cruel? Unable to hold it in any longer, I lowered my head and began to cry. The sobs poured out of me, taking with them the suffocating weight in my chest. For the first time, I let myself release everything I've been holding in. Dean seemed startled to see me crying. He hesitated as if he wanted to step forward, but my retreating steps made him stop short. Finally, I raised my head, tears still streaking my face, and said quietly, "Dean, just let me go. You know what? Watching you cling on like this is absolutely disgusting." Dean had always been proud and self-centered. Hearing me say that pushed him over the edge. His expression twisted into a sneer. "Fine," he spat venomously. "Let's divorce. Whoever backs out first is a coward." The divorce procedures were over quickly. Within minutes, I held the divorce certificate in my hand. Dean's face remained stormy as he turned and walked away without looking back. I watched his retreating figure for a moment before dropping my gaze and walking off in the opposite direction. After the divorce, I left with $50,000 and the company apartment Clara Monroe had been living in. Even though the thought of her having stayed there disgusted me, the property was worth far more than cash. In a few years, when real estate prices in the southern city skyrocketed, that apartment would make me a small fortune. Word of my divorce from Dean spread like wildfire through the textile factory. Clara Monroe, of course, pretended to be oblivious and refused to move out of the apartment. I didn't bother arguing. Instead, I hired a group of strong men to help her move. The moment her belongings started piling up in the courtyard, Clara, wearing a white blouse and a tight black skirt, rushed back. She nearly lost her mind when she saw the mess. "What are you doing? Don't touch my things!" she screamed, standing in the doorway to block their way. "This is illegal. I'll call the police." But the men ignored her, brushing her aside like she was nothing. "Ma'am, step aside. We're just doing our job." "Stop. I said stop," Clara shouted, red-faced and furious. By the time most of her things were out, I walked out of the bedroom, my posture calm and composed, and looked her straight in the eye. "Clara," I said lightly, "you're not the mistress here anymore. I think it's time you moved on." She turned to glare at me, shaking with anger. "I'm not a mistress. Nothing happened between me and Dean. We're innocent." I smiled faintly, my tone dripping with mockery. "Innocent, is that what you call it? Why are you slandering me like this?" Clara Monroe shot back, her voice trembling with indignation. She looked utterly humiliated, her eyes reeling as though I'd dealt her the greatest injustice. Her whole demeanor screamed fragility, like a porcelain doll on the verge of cracking. I wasn't moved. Rolling my eyes, I sneered, "Give it a rest, Clara. If you're not Dean's mistress, then why are you living here rent-free?" Hearing that, the crowd of onlookers, neighbors who had gathered to watch the scene, began whispering to each other. "So she really hasn't been paying rent? If that's the case, their relationship must be fishy. No wonder Audrey divorced him. Even the mistress moved in. Shoo! Stop talking. Dean's here." The murmurs quieted when Dean appeared. He looked far more disheveled than the last time I saw him. His stubble was unkempt, his face gaunt, and the stench of cigarettes and alcohol clung to him like a second skin. "Was all this really necessary, Audrey?" Dean asked, his tone low, as he immediately took Clara's side. The thought of him siding with her while she was still living in my apartment made me sick to my stomach. Everything about it, the space she occupied, the air she breathed, felt tainted. Clara, who had been glaring at me like she wanted to tear me apart, was suddenly restrained by Dean. He turned his eyes to me, a strange curve to his lips. Then he spoke as if humoring me. "Fine, as you wish." Dean turned to Clara with a softer tone. "Clara, I'll find you another place to stay, somewhere better than this. Don't worry." As he spoke, his eyes flickered toward me, holding a silent challenge as if daring me to react. I didn't bother to look at him, turning my face aside. I caught sight of Clara, whose cheeks flushed a delicate pink. She was smiling sweetly, as if imagining some romantic future. "Thank you, Dean," she said, her voice soft, sweet, and nauseating. "If it weren't for you, I don't know what I would have done." The two of them flirted openly in front of me, their words tinged with ambiguity. I had lived through this kind of nonsense in my previous life. By now it didn't faze me. Instead, I gave an exaggerated shiver and muttered, "Disgusting. If you two want to cozy up to each other, go do it somewhere else. Don't dirty my sight." I personally saw to it that Clara was driven out of the apartment that day, her belongings unceremoniously tossed outside. Dean left with her, but before he did, he shot me a look that I couldn't quite read, some mix of anger and something else. When news of my divorce spread through the textile factory, my parents demanded I reconcile with Dean. They went so far as to threaten to disown me if I refused, their behavior no different from my past life. "Every marriage has its ups and downs," my father lectured. "You can't just talk about divorce every time you're angry. That's ridiculous." My mother paced back and forth in front of me, sighing incessantly. I finally snapped, unable to hold it in any longer. "Mom, do you know Dean is still tangled up with his ex, Clara Monroe? She got divorced and he immediately ran back to her, all eager and happy. After everything he's done to humiliate me, why should I have to put up with it?" My mother's face fell, but she muttered, "But nothing happened, did it? Dean said she was just going through a hard time, and he was helping her out. And while you were pregnant, he made sure you had the best food and rest. He's always treated you well. Compared to most women, you're living a good life." Her voice softened as she continued, "Audrey, sometimes you have to turn a blind eye. Not everything has to be so black and white. You don't need to make such a fuss over it." She sighed heavily, her expression full of worry. "Your father and I are getting old. In the future, the only people you'll be able to rely on are Dean and your child. But you." My father, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. "Marriage isn't a game, Audrey. If there's a chance to reconcile, then do it. I think that boy still cares about you, otherwise he wouldn't have come here to talk to us. He still treats us like his in-laws." Watching my parents, I realized they had completely fallen for Dean's act, just as they had in my past life. I had no patience left for persuasion. I said firmly, "It's impossible. I've already terminated the child. How could I start over with him again? Everyone knows you can't take back water that's been spilled. In my past life, I lacked the courage to act. I was always hesitating, too soft, too indecisive, and it cost me everything. If after reliving my life I chose the same path, willingly humiliating myself again, then I deserved whatever misery came my way. Ever since I quit my job due to pregnancy, Dean had looked down on me. He compared me to other women constantly, treating me like some sort of ornament he was forced to provide for. I depended on him financially while he kept his ex on the side. He wanted the perfect setup. Stability at home while he enjoyed excitement elsewhere. It was as if he thought he could have it all. I knew that after my divorce, the neighbors were laughing at me behind my back. "Audrey, don't worry," I told them with a mocking smile. "I'll be leaving Southern City in a couple of days. You won't have to see me anymore. Out of sight, out of mind." I had made up my mind to leave for Northern City. Not only would it allow me to break free from Dean completely, but it would also save my parents and sister-in-law from the constant tension my presence caused. My extended family had an aunt who'd married and moved to Northern City, so I wouldn't be entirely alone. I bought a train ticket for the following morning and arranged to rent out the apartment I'd reclaimed from Clara Monroe. I told no one about my departure plans. Southern City was a city full of opportunities during its economic boom, and I knew I couldn't leave empty-handed. The day before I left, I went to the textile factory to wholesale some new clothing designs to bring with me to Northern City. I sought out my closest friend from the factory, May. When she heard about my plans, she was the only one who didn't try to talk me out of it. Ever since Dean had made money in business, everyone blamed me for our divorce. "You don't know how lucky you are," they would say. "You're useless, couldn't even hold on to your husband." May, though, simply said, "This is how you're supposed to be." Just those few words gave me immense courage. She was right, I used to be fearless, willing to try anything. We finalized our business arrangement, with May agreeing to collect rent on my behalf, and I headed to a nearby supermarket to pick up supplies for the journey. There I unexpectedly ran into Dean. He was buying cigarettes, surrounded by his sycophantic friends who followed him like shadows. "Dean, are you really going to marry Clara Monroe?" one of them teased, nudging him with a smirk. "Everyone's talking about it." Hearing that, Dean's hand froze mid-motion as he picked up the cigarette pack. His face darkened and his voice was sharp. What nonsense are you spouting? There's nothing going on between us. Noticing Dean's sour mood, another guy, yellow hair, quickly tried to smooth things over. Yeah, exactly. That woman's already been married once. She's not good enough for you, Dean. Unfortunately, his words hit a nerve. Dean's face twisted and, without warning, he kicked yellow hair hard in the shin. Yellow hair, who the hell are you calling second-hand? He snarled. Don't get me wrong, Dean. I didn't mean you. Yellow hair stammered, trying to backpedal. Realizing what he'd implied, his expression changed as he cautiously tested the waters. So, Dean, are you planning to get back together with Audrey? Dean didn't answer, but he didn't deny it either. Yellow hair's eyes widened in surprise. You know, Dean, Audrey's actually pretty great. She's beautiful, knows how to manage a household. Getting back together wouldn't be such a bad idea. I heard she hasn't found a job yet. If you show up for her now while she's at her lowest, you could probably win her back easily. Before Dean could respond, one of his other friends, a man in a floral shirt with slicked back hair, interrupted with a sneer. Win her back? What nonsense. You're too naive. You don't spoil women like that, or they'll just walk all over you. Dean, let her suffer a bit. When she's had enough, she'll come crawling back on her own. Dean lit a cigarette, took a slow drag, and nodded in agreement, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. You're right, floral shirt. Once she's had her fill of hardship, she'll come back to me. I've got time to wait. They paid for their things and left, still laughing and chatting. I stayed hidden in the corner, watching them walk away, my lips curling into a bitter, sarcastic smile. The next morning before sunrise, I grabbed my suitcase and made my way to the train station. After days of traveling, I finally arrived in Northern City. A week later, with the help of my aunt, I began to settle into my new life. I rented a small house in an alley near my aunt's place and started selling clothes at the market. Although it was exhausting, there was no shortage of business in Northern City. Clothing and small accessories from the southern city were popular here, and my entire stock would sell out within 2 weeks. When I finally recouped my costs and started turning a profit, I called May and asked her to send me a new batch of the latest styles by train. Hearing how well the clothes were selling in Northern City, May was thrilled. After we wrapped up the business talk, she suddenly changed the topic, her voice turning lighthearted. Audrey, have you heard about Dean and Clara Monroe? Caught off guard by the mention of those two names, I froze for a moment. In the busy days I'd had since leaving the southern city, I rarely thought about the past anymore, including my previous life. After all, people need to live in the present. I'd been given the rare chance to start over. I couldn't allow myself to get caught up in past grievances or wallow in self-pity. Lowering my eyes, I asked half-heartedly, "No, what happened?" Hearing my question, May's gossipy side kicked in and she excitedly said, "After you left, Clara Monroe tried to become the real lady boss of Dean's company. She went all out to seduce him, but for some reason, Dean kept her at arm's length, neither hot nor cold. Then get this. She tried to drug him and it backfired. Dean fired her on the spot, and he ended up in the hospital. Clara lost her job, ruined her reputation, and now she's hiding at home in shame. Serves her right." May paused for a moment before continuing with a note of concern. "Oh, and one more thing. Dean's company has been shifting its focus recently. I heard he's planning to move operations to the northern city. I don't know who he's connected with, but it seems like he's serious about expanding here. If you don't want to get involved with him again, you should be careful." "Got it, thanks, May," I replied. After hanging up, I couldn't help but sigh. What a mess. I never liked to assume the worst, but knowing Dean, there was no way this was a coincidence. He must have heard about my whereabouts through my parents. But what I couldn't understand was why he refused to let me go. Was it because his pride couldn't handle losing to me? Winter in the northern city was bitterly cold. Snow blanketed the streets, and I started selling winter clothes, down jackets and cotton coats that were all the rage. I didn't want to deal with any comments from friends or relatives, so I decided not to return to the southern city for the new year. Instead, I wired 300 yuan to my parents for the holidays. On the morning of New Year's Day, I didn't set up my stall. Instead, my aunt, who enjoyed her small luxuries, insisted on dressing me up. I wore a light gray turtleneck sweater under a black coat, paired with dark blue jeans and ankle boots. My hair was tied into a simple bun, revealing a small stretch of pale neck. My face had a light touch of makeup, soft and natural. Finally, my aunt replaced my earrings with small pearl studs, then stepped back to admire her work. Money isn't everything, you know. You're in the prime of your life, don't waste your beauty, she said, satisfied. If I were your age, I'd dress up every day, not like you running around in those drab tracksuits all the time. You've still got the best taste, Auntie, I replied with a smile, wrapping a scarf around my neck to appease her. I had to admit, with her touch, I looked refined and confident, far better than usual. It was after I left a clothing store, weighed down with bags of new outfits, that I ran into Dean. I hadn't noticed him at first, but he was hard to ignore. His cold, sharp gaze stopped me in my tracks, sending a chill through me as though I'd been doused in ice water. The street around us fell silent, and within seconds he strode over and grabbed my wrist tightly. I struggled, but his grip was unrelenting. Dean's dark eyes scanned me from head to toe, his face darkening as he sneered. All dressed up like this, who are you trying to impress? And smiling so brightly too. Funny how your face fell the moment you saw me. What, do I disgust you that much? Let go, I said coldly, glaring at him. But Dean's gaze only grew more dangerous, as if he were ready to tear me apart. He was truly enraged this time. I stopped resisting and stood still, quietly waiting for him to calm down. After a moment, Dean's composure returned, though barely. He reached out and cupped my face, forcing me to look into his eyes. His voice was low, almost pleading. Audrey, I regret it. I regret divorcing you. I don't care about the child anymore. If we remarry, you can decide whether you want more children or not. If you want to work, I'll support you completely. Anything you want, I'll agree to. Hearing such words from Dean's mouth felt like a miracle. In my past life, even when I made a fortune in stocks and invested it in a milk tea shop, he had dismissed me, calling me naive. The very sight of him now filled me with disgust. I turned my head slightly, restraining the anger bubbling inside me, and finally said in a calm voice, Dean, we're already divorced. We're nothing to each other now. Don't make this harder. You should move on. But I can't, he said stubbornly. His eyes lingered on me as his Adam's apple bobbed. Audrey, let's start over. I know I did so many things wrong in the past, but I never wanted to betray you. Clara Monroe. She was a moment of stupidity, a way to satisfy my ridiculous pride. I don't care about her anymore. I fired her. I swear she'll never appear in front of you again. I married you because I liked you, not for any other reason. I looked at him for a long moment before speaking. My voice was steady but cold. Whether you regret it or not doesn't matter anymore. I don't love you anymore, Dean. A marriage without love is just an empty shell. For over 20 years I lived like a widow. 2 lifetimes of a hollow marriage. I've had enough. Before he could respond, a gentle voice broke the tense silence. Audrey. I turned to see James standing at the corner of the store with his 4-year-old daughter Lily. The little girl, holding a string of candied hawthorns, spotted me and squealed in delight. Daddy, it's Auntie Audrey. She let go of his hand and ran toward me. James quickly stopped her, his face warm and calm as always. Dean's expression twisted immediately. His dark eyes flickered with something sharp, and his lips curled into a mocking smile. So that's what this is. You really do have someone new, huh? Audrey, you're refusing me for a second-hand man? You'd rather be a stepmother? How cheap can you be? His words cut like a knife, sharp and cruel. I took a deep breath, lifting my chin as I looked him straight in the eye. With a steady voice I said, You're absolutely right. I'd rather be someone else's stepmother, have someone else's children, than ever go back to you or have your child again. Dean's eyes darkened even further, his gaze venomous. My words had hit him where it hurt most, piercing straight through his pride. Sensing his hesitation, I pried his fingers off my arm one by one and shoved his hand away. The walk back with James and Lily felt slightly awkward. After a moment of silence, I finally spoke, my tone lighter. That was my ex-husband just now. He's a bit unstable. I said those things to make him leave, so don't take it seriously, okay? I tapped my forehead awkwardly, as if to explain away the situation. James chuckled softly, his smile gentle. Don't worry, I didn't take it to heart. I smiled, feeling a little more at ease. I had met James through his daughter, Lily, And it wasn't until later that I learned he was a university professor, one of the most promising young men in the area. He carried himself with a calm, scholarly elegance, like a gentleman straight out of a book. If it hadn't been for the divorce caused by his wife's desire to go abroad, their family of 3 would probably have been happy together. Lost in thought, I didn't notice James glancing at me as if hesitating to say something. It wasn't until Lily ran off to buy a set of knitting needles from a nearby vendor that I felt James stop beside me. The small alley was full of children's laughter, echoing off the snow-dusted walls. James suddenly turned to me and said softly, "Audrey, about what you said earlier." Before he could finish, I gasped, "Oh, it's snowing again." I stretched out my hand, letting the delicate snowflakes land on my palm. The cold bit into my skin, but I couldn't bear to pull my hand away. "You know," I murmured softly, "it wasn't until I came here that I saw snow for the first time, white as far as the eye could see, painting a scene straight out of a dream." I blinked, then turned to James with a smile. "Oh, by the way, I'm moving soon. I bought a small storefront with living quarters on Wan Street. I plan to run my business there. Other than visiting my family, I probably won't come back here much." I glanced at Lily, who was playing nearby, and added softly, "She's a sweet girl, but kids can be careless. Make sure you and your family keep an eye on her. You can't be too careful these days." James was smart. He caught the meaning behind my words instantly. After a long pause, he withdrew his gaze and looked ahead at Lily, a faint smile on his lips. "Then I'll wish you success in advance. May your business flourish." "Thanks for the good wishes," I replied, smiling lightly. I walked over to Lily, crouched down, and tucked a red envelope into the pocket of her coat. After saying goodbye, I quickly made my way back to my aunt's courtyard. Only then did I let out a long breath of relief. Inside, my aunt was reclining on a rocking chair, listening to the radio. When she heard me come in, she turned her head with a grin. "Did you have fun today? Just now Mrs. Lee came by and told me she saw you walking back with that young man James from next door." Before she could say anything more, I waved my hands defensively. No, it's not like that. We just bumped into each other on the way back. And Lily was with him too." Seeing my flustered expression, my aunt sighed deeply and couldn't resist offering her thoughts. "Audrey, for someone who's been divorced, James is a great choice. Yes, he has a 4-year-old daughter, but Lily is well behaved and really likes you. You won't have to worry about getting along with her. I've lived here for over 30 years, and I know James's family well. His parents are reasonable, and James himself is a good man with a solid character. You're a woman. There's no need to carry the world on your shoulders. Think about it, won't you?" I knew my aunt meant well. After all, most people still had limited views on marriage and relationships, far less open-minded than they'd be 20 years later. And she was right, Lily was a sweet child. But becoming someone's stepmother wasn't something I could accept. I didn't want to sound too harsh, especially since her advice came from a place of love. So I sat down beside her, looped my arm through hers, and spoke gently but firmly. "Auntie, no matter how good James and his family are, being with him would mean compromising myself." She frowned, clearly confused. I decided to be even clearer. "Let's say I do marry James. No matter how much Lily likes me now, James would constantly have to balance his relationship with me and his daughter. There would always be friction, big or small. I don't think I'd ever be able to win against a child, and honestly I wouldn't want to. I'm selfish, Auntie. I don't have that kind of self-sacrificing nature. Being a stepmother isn't for me. Raising a child is hard enough, and it's even harder when the child isn't your own." I hesitated for a moment before continuing. "And Lily's mother, she didn't abandon her, she's just abroad. What if one day she comes back? How will James and Lily react to her? They can't let her go. Where would that leave me? I've seen enough of men's white moonlight and first loves to last a lifetime, and I want no part of it. I've learned my lesson and I'll pass on that mess. Thank you very much." My aunt looked like she still wanted to argue, but I propped my chin in my hand and said with a smile, "Auntie, remarriage has always been tricky. If you marry someone better off, they dominate you. If you marry someone worse off, people say you're settling. I'm a businesswoman. I calculate costs better than anyone. I've never once thought about getting married again. Marriage isn't the only path for a woman, and I don't need it to prove my worth." I've got money, property, brains, and I'm not lacking for love. Why would I tie myself down? Hearing this, my aunt finally gave up, though she sighed heavily. You're stubborn as a mule, you know that. But there was a hint of relief in her voice, as if she could see how fulfilled I already was. She patted my hand and smiled faintly. After that conversation, I threw myself into expanding my business. I stopped playing small and began growing a legitimate clothing enterprise. As my business flourished, Dean inevitably reappeared, trying to worm his way back into my life. But no matter how persistent he was, I had already moved far beyond his reach. I never gave Dean a kind look, no matter what tricks he pulled. Whether he pretended to be drunk and whispered sweet nothings or played the pity card. To me, he was nothing more than a clown, a ridiculous act at best. The wounds he had inflicted on me were real. Even if the scars healed, the marks were still there. I didn't believe in broken mirrors being pieced back together. I believed in karma, in watching the tables turn until the very end. Why should I forgive him just because he shed a few tears and muttered, "I'm sorry"? Why should I pretend nothing ever happened? Seeing the growing coldness in my eyes, Dean finally stopped his relentless pursuit and switched to a softer approach. But by the time I'd earned enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life, I left for a third-tier city, bought a villa with a sprawling garden, and settled into a quiet, peaceful retirement. I wanted to distance myself completely from Dean. After all, as long as I stayed home, he had no way of pestering me. And so, I ignored him for 20 years. When he turned 45, Dean was diagnosed with late-stage lung cancer. Lying in his hospital bed, frail and weak, his family couldn't help but call me. But I never picked up the phone, not even when the doctor announced his death. I had said I wouldn't forgive him, and I meant it. I kept that promise for a lifetime. The alternate past, the daughter's story. In the alternate past, after the news broke that both my son and I had fallen down the stairs and died, Dean and his daughter Annie rushed home. The room was dim when Annie stepped in, and the first thing she saw was Dean cradling my lifeless body, his face a mask of madness. "Audrey, stop pretending. Isn't this what you wanted? I'm home now. How long are you going to keep this up? If you hadn't been so strong-willed, if you hadn't stopped caring about me, if you hadn't acted like you didn't care about anything, I never would have tried to provoke you with Clara Monroe." Dean shouted, his voice hoarse, as if trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. Unable to bear it any longer, Annie shoved him away and protectively stood over my body. She glared at him with pure disgust. "My mom is dead. Who are you putting on this show for? You're disgusting, just like my mom always said you are. You're pathetic." Tears welled in Annie's eyes as she choked out her words, her voice trembling with fury. "When she was alive, all she wanted was for you to treat her with the respect she deserved as your wife. But what did you do? You spent your days flirting and whispering sweet nothings to your precious soulmate. Don't tell me it wasn't intentional, because it broke her. Broke her completely. If it weren't for me, if she hadn't been afraid that you and that woman would hurt me, she would have left you long ago and lived a better life without you." Annie's voice cracked with grief, but she wasn't done. She tore the jade bead bracelets from her wrists and thrust them in front of Dean. "Do you see these scars?" she screamed, pointing at the faint but deep marks that still marred her skin. "She did this to herself after I was born. Postpartum depression. Nerve damage. And what were you doing then? You were mocking her for being unreasonable, for being embarrassing, for not knowing her place. She told you she wasn't feeling well, but you never cared, not once. You and everyone else trampled her into the dirt." Dean opened his mouth as if to say something, but no sound came. He could only stand there, his lips trembling as Annie broke down, tears streaming down her face. Every time Dean tried to step closer, Annie lashed out, biting, kicking, doing whatever she could to keep him away. It was as if she wanted to tear him apart in her grief. After Audrey's burial, Dean spiraled into alcoholism. 3 years later, unable to keep up, he handed over the company to Annie, his only daughter. No one dared question her authority. She was Dean's sole heir, after all. The board members who didn't approve of her decisions could do nothing but swallow their pride and stay silent. Once Annie took control, she wasted no time. She boldly restructured the company, making sweeping changes. First, she cut ties with Clara Monroe's company, pulled back all investments, and publicly announced that they would never cooperate again, due to severe quality contamination in building materials. Clara's fledgling company, barely a year old, couldn't survive such a blow. Without Dean's support, no clients were willing to take the risk of working with her. Salaries stopped being paid, employees revolted, and Clara found herself scrambling desperately. Out of options, Clara finally showed up at Dean's door, begging for help. Before she could say much, Annie stormed in, kicked open the door, and slapped Clara across the face. "I'm the head of the Dean family now, do you understand that?" she hissed. "You always pride yourself on being an independent, clear-headed woman, don't you? What happened, Miss Strong and Capable? Did you lose your strength the moment you lost a man?" Annie's sharp sarcasm hit Clara Monroe like a whip. Before Clara could even muster a defense, Annie pointed toward Dean and continued, "What a pity though. He's just an old man with no real power now. If you really want to marry him, go ahead. After all, I've already taken over the company, and thanks to all those nutritional supplements my mother fed him over the years, he lost his ability to have kids a long time ago. You'd be doing me a favor by taking care of him for free. As his daughter, I'd be delighted." Annie's words struck like lightning. Clara's face turned pale, and Dean could only let out a bitter, humorless laugh. So she never believed me, he thought. His expression twisted as the weight of his years hit him all at once. He muttered to himself, "I've become a joke. Trusting you would have been like trusting a pig to climb a tree." Annie smirked coldly and turned her back. Audrey had profoundly influenced Annie's life choices. In the end, Annie chose never to marry. Even when she decided she wanted a child, she went to a sperm bank, selected a donor with exceptional genes, and raised the child on her own. And so they each lived their own version of happiness. Dean, however, spent his final years in quiet disgrace. Annie had him moved to Audrey's villa, where he was allowed to move freely everywhere except Audrey's room. "You don't deserve it," Annie told him flatly when he asked. Even his request to be buried alongside Audrey when the time came was flatly rejected. "You already disgusted my mother for an entire lifetime. There's no way I'd let you defile her path to reincarnation." Dean died with regret in his heart. Yet, for reasons unknown, he opened his eyes one day to find himself back in his youth. The line between dream and reality blurred, but one thing was clear. Audrey was alive. She was so vibrant, so radiant, even more captivating than when he had first met her. But this time things were different. They were already divorced, their daughter didn't exist, and their relationship was icy at best. Dean thought that if he treated her with genuine care and sincerity, if he showed her how much he had changed, she would forgive him. Yet, even when he fell ill with lung cancer, when chemotherapy reduced him to a hollow shell, Audrey remained indifferent. She never softened, never wavered. It was only then that Dean finally understood. Audrey truly deeply hated him. The end. Thank you so much for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story and love powerful rebirth and revenge dramas like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support truly means everything. See you in the next story.